Hello and welcome to All About A-League, the show that's all about A-League, Socceroos and everything to do with the world game in Australia. My name is Gabriel D'Angelo and with me to talk about all things A-League is 3ZZZ broadcaster Bernd Merkel. Hello Bernd.
Hey Gabriel, how are you going?
Good, thank you. And journalist for Neos Cosmos, Alex Anafantis. Hello Alex.
Good evening Gabriel.
Before we go back to the boys on the couch, let's go over the results for round 24 of the A-League, which started off on Friday night with Melbourne City defeating Brisbane Roar 4-1. On Saturday, Newcastle defeated Western Sydney 3-2. The Big Blue at the SCG saw Sydney FC defeat Melbourne Victory 2-1. On Sunday, Adelaide United defeated Wellington 3-1 and Perth Glory were far too good for Central Coast 3-0. Now over to the ladder, and Perth Glory remain on top with Sydney FC in second, Melbourne Victory, Wellington Phoenix, Adelaide United and Melbourne City making up the top six, while Newcastle, Western Sydney, Brisbane Roar and Central Coast make up the bottom of the ladder. Some interesting results and movements there, guys. Starting with you, Bernd, which game for you was match of the round?
Well, it's a bit sad that we should talk about football, but we have to talk about that pitch on Saturday night at the Big Blue, I think. Sydney Cricket Ground was just a disgrace, and if someone like an Ola Toivonen makes a comment on that and says, guys, this is not good enough, and he's one of the marquee players of this league. Therefore, I would have loved to say, the match itself. I mean, as it is always a tough match, a close match. Sydney finally won against Melbourne Victory, but this was just absolutely not acceptable.
Yes, absolutely. That pitch was definitely a disgrace. But looking at it from a result perspective, as I mentioned last week, this result showed that Victory were a bit more fortunate against Perth. So this week, Sydney were the ones that were fortunate against Victory, although they had all the chances for that win. Now it'll be interesting to see up until the end of the season how Sydney will be able to cope and if they'll be able to catch up with Perth.
Yeah, I mean, just going back on what you said about the Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC game, I mean, you're right. I mean, I find it embarrassing and tragic that the two biggest clubs in the A-League, the biggest rivalry in the A-League, that for all these, like, during the days, we're not talking about what happened on the pitch, we're talking about the pitch. You know, Kevin Muscat said that it was unacceptable, that it was a disgrace, that it was unsafe. Terry Antonis could be out for the rest of the season. He could miss the finals. And he's a key cog in the whole Victory team. The PFA are going to launch an investigation, and so they should, because it's sad because this isn't the first time that this has happened. And I won't be surprised that it's going to happen again. I mean, like, are you telling me that there's no other ground in Sydney or even in Wollongong or anywhere in New South Wales that could have hosted that game?
Well, exactly, and it's going to keep happening as long as these types of games are being held in stadiums that host other types of games from other codes like the NRL, the AFL and all of this. That's why we need football-specific stadiums to host these types of games. It's important because otherwise the pitches get overused and they're not in a good enough condition. But what I would like to know is who checked that pitch before the game and who said that it was in a good enough condition for such a game to be held there.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
And if you look at I think the FFA made an announcement, but it was a very general announcement. So, right, we can't accept that and so on. But as you said, really, who has proven that and said, let's go and play? And you also have to be aware of, I mean, there is not much football matches of the A-League that might gain a little bit of more interest both in Australia and outside Australia. And then I wouldn't say the world watches Australia, but if people had watched that Melbourne against Sydney, because it is the biggest game in our, the biggest match in our league, and then you see that, you turn your TV on, and then you see that pitch, and you think, what is that? In Germany we call it Kreisklasse, so it's League 7 or League 8, you know, and even there we would have better pitches.
Yeah, well, there you go. And you mentioned Ola Toivonen. Yeah. He's got a huge fan base. Honda's got a huge fan base. People saw that. They watched what was going on, and we looked at like an amateur league. The A-League compared to, don't worry about the rest of the world, but compared to other leagues in Asia, we look like an amateur league, allowing things like that to happen. How can anybody from the FFA find that acceptable.
Yeah.
That can't be representative of our league. That can't be the image that we want to give out to the rest of the world, and then say that we want to be more respected within the AFC or within the confederations. We need to check ourselves. We need to be more responsible and more respective of ourselves first of all, and then the sport.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, and here's a statement from the SCG. They made a statement regarding the ground. The field has been inspected by independent experts in the past 2 weeks, with satisfactory results recorded for all codes. Well, they have to be kidding, because that was not a ground. That was like a patchwork quilt.
Yeah.
That was like a Frankenstein's monster of a ground, where they just took pieces of different grounds from different venues and just put it on the SCG.
Yes.
And you're exactly right what you said. Kevin Muscat said, there is this lack of respect when it comes to football. We said this in our first program regarding funding. There is a lack of respect, and it does feel like, from the outside looking in, that the FFA allows this to happen. When is the FFA going to be more proactive and defending the players, the fans, the coaches, and the game itself?
And especially the best players, right, that you have in the A-League, definitely in this match, and they don't get the best conditions.
There you go.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving right along to the players and moments around 24, starting with you, Alex. Who and what caught your attention this week?
Well, Apostolos Stamatilopoulos definitely caught my attention this week, because he was in the middle of a great performance. He had scored 2 goals, and then he went and got the most, I'm going to call it silly red card that I've seen in a while, because that was sort of a dangerous tackle, and it was uncalled for. So, yeah, I'm going to say that caught my attention, but also the Dimi Petratos goal during the Jets versus Wanderers game, because you rarely see a goal straight from a corner kick.
Yeah, an Olympic goal, as they say. Yeah.
I agree with Alex, with Apostolopoulos. That was Apostolos Stamatilopoulos. Yeah, I need the Greek expert
Sorry.
here.
It's his cousin. Yeah. Alex's cousin, just say that.
But yeah, that's the problem, that we have this match, and then he scores those 2 goals, especially in a part of the season where it's getting really important. And Adelaide was looking for a striker the whole season, and then maybe Marco Kurz has found him, especially with moving then to Western United after the season, and then something like that. But another player I want to mention is Ninkovic from Sydney FC, because I think already last week he had his 100th game for Sydney FC and has an outstanding winning record. And now he scored that goal in extra time, and I really want to pay my respect for what he has achieved with Sydney FC over those years, especially as a marquee player, outstanding performance, and I must say, really well done.
Yeah, and a true professional. He's been really, really good for the game.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, boys. Some interesting points made. When we come back, our intrepid reporter, Max Allrounder, had an exclusive interview with none other than Craig Foster, which you won't want to miss. So don't go anywhere. You're watching All About A-League. Welcome back to the second half of the show. You're watching All About A-League. Craig Foster is a man who has been involved with Australian football for many decades. As a player, as a coach, as a commentator, as a media pundit, as an ambassador, as a CEO, and now as a human rights advocate. Craig's contribution to the game is immense and profound. Recently, he was in Melbourne for the Football and Human Rights, the World Game Sticking Up for Players' Rights Forum, and he was kind enough to take time to speak with our intrepid reporter, Max Allrounder, about all things football and his heavy involvement in the Free Hakeem campaign.
Here with Craig Foster. Craig Foster, 29 times Socceroo, and you was a reference in football as an analyst and much more than that. So welcome to our show.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Nice to see you. I've heard about the show, obviously. You guys do a great job at every level of the game, and whether it's community or otherwise, we need all support, all the media that we can possibly get. You know, we don't have enough. We've got to rebuild, I think, in many ways. So I support what you guys are doing. I'm happy to be here.
So you are here, there is a seminar, Football and Human Rights. So about the case, the Hakeem case that you were involved, can you tell us from inside, because you were very close, obviously, your thoughts, your feelings during all the process?
Wow, gee, it was a really big, very complex case, and I would say it was the most important human rights case in football since the new human rights provisions under the statutes of Article 3 of FIFA. We have had other ones which, you know, are important cases. For instance, the Afghanistan women's national team and sexual abuse and other things. The reason I say this one was important is because he was incarcerated, it was immediate, it was urgent. And whereas in the Afghanistan women's case, it is a question now of FIFA acting appropriately in terms of investigation and how they're going to manage the situation with the Afghanistan Football Federation and all of these things. With Hakeem, it was very different. It was quite rare, I guess, in the sense that he was in immediate peril. We needed football to act in an urgent manner, and it doesn't do that well. There's many levels of the game, of course. It had to go from Australia to Asia and to FIFA. So those levels of bureaucracy mean that typically the game would be slow to act, and it was. And the imperative for us as former players was to ensure that both governments and royal families, and thirdly, the game of football, was able to do what was necessary to save this kid. So we saw it as a real test of the 2016-2017 human rights policies of FIFA. The human rights policy that FIFA has is the strongest presently of any major governing body in sport globally, although I must say the Commonwealth Games is also another entity which has demonstrated a strong commitment to human rights. But having a policy is very different from implementing it, obviously. And this was the first test where everyone in football needed to really step up. What the case demonstrated was that sport will always have a reticence, a reluctance, and for some period, a bit of an inability to do so because of the politics that sport is predicated on. And people don't like to step forward because they think it's going to compromise their opportunities in future at a higher level of the game. Or in FIFA's case, you have all of the sponsors and you have all the political and economic relationships with all of these countries involved, and that includes Thailand, Australia, AFC and Bahrain, but particularly Bahrain coming out of the Gulf region. So it was an extremely complex case, and you know, we're delighted that in the end Hakeem, you know, is back home playing for Pascoe Vale. So it had a wonderful ending, but now is about extrapolating all the lessons out of the case and to make sure that in future the next Hakeem doesn't need a global campaign, you know, where people have to rush around the world to try and force football to act.
The whole Hakeem case was an extremely delicate and emotional one. And to see Craig be so vocal and so strong in his support, it played such a vital role in ensuring justice was done. What did you guys think?
Well, first of all, we need to be thankful that a man's life was saved. So that's the most important piece that we need to take out of this. Secondly, having watched the interview and being at the event with Craig Foster, the one thing that came to my mind was I felt there was a bit of a lack or a difficulty with the whole situation and FIFA and AFC. So the question came to my mind that if the FFA had been more involved within those two confederations, maybe it would have made things a bit easier for Craig Foster and for the Football Victoria and the whole football community in general to advocate for Hakeem.
I think what I realized when I was at that event as well, how sad actually it is, with all that respect, Pascoe Vale, a small club, right? And that they have to take the first steps and get it all running. And I mean, Craig Foster said that as well on that night, that especially FFA or also the FIFA, first of all, they were just working somewhere in the background. you know, but nothing was happening, and their life was at threat. So, and if you keep that in mind, and it's actually shocking. So hopefully the lessons have been learned from that, and that we know in the future not that whole campaign or such a whole campaign, although it was successful, don't get me wrong, but not that whole thing has to be started again or in a similar way to get people's awareness and also human rights working in a way they should work.
Yeah. No, in fact, to add to what Bernd is saying, I remember Craig Foster saying that the FFA were not considered a part of how they were going to move in order to get Hakim out of that situation. They weren't even part of the equation. They were sort of considered more of an obstacle because they weren't moving at all. They weren't giving any answers. They were just being really vague about the whole thing. So yeah, for the Football Federation of Australia to be operating like that, I sort of think of it as unacceptable.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. I mean, you both raised the point that in these sorts of circumstances, the FFA really should be taking more of a leadership role. I mean, when we're talking about humanitarian issues, asylum seekers, immigration, the FFA should really be taking more of a proactive approach to things. They should be leaders rather than followers. I mean, we pride ourselves in that football is the world game. Well, it is. It's played everywhere around the world. We pride ourselves in the rich tapestry of multiculturalism entwined with football in this country. I mean, immigrants, migrants, they're the ones that built the game in Australia. We are where we are when it comes to football because of all their hard work, and it wasn't easy. So in these sorts of issues, having an Australian footballer being treated so unjustly and so inhumanely, the FFA should be taking more of a proactive approach to this. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, speaking about this, this might sound a little bit controversial, but because about what I mentioned earlier, that I think that we should have a more active part within the AFC and and FIFA.
Yeah.
I don't find it agreeable, but I find it understandable that Chris Nicol and the FFA supported Sheikh Salman because they need to expand. They need to be. They need to make connections within the AFC first, and then they need to, and then they can make decisions and all that.
And I think on another note is very interesting also for the future, what role is sports or what role can or should football play in when it comes to politics and human rights?
Sure.
First always says we have the responsibility, and even not the responsibility, at least the opportunity to interact and to be involved more in that. And there are a lot of discussions also on that night when it comes to Qatar 2022, right? Will Greg Foster go there, and will he still then be representing SBS, happening all the controversial discussions about that? And he also said it's very difficult, it's a difficult situation, but on the other hand, he wants to take that opportunity then maybe also and make his voice count there, right? And in general, also looking back, German clubs going to the Middle East for their winter season, and always it's sports. We make our comments, so it's tricky. But I think there need to be a consensus. Where are we with football? And we can achieve a lot with it. But we need to bring then the right people together, and Greg Foster is definitely the right person.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like with the whole Hakim case, there was a lot of people working hard behind the scenes, and you touched on it, Pascoe Vale. They did such an amazing job. I mean, they just kept the faith. They kept fighting the good fight. They were sensational. And as you mentioned, Craig Foster is what he is. He's a media personality. He's on radio, he's on television. He's got a very vast social media following. So having someone like him on board, he didn't just do a tweet or a Facebook post or anything like that. He really was involved in the whole process. He went over there.
Yeah, he flew over to Switzerland with the FIFA people, right?
And let's be honest.
Not only FIFA.
Well, you know, because of his profile, let's be honest, because of him, the federal government got involved. Because, you know, let's be honest, if it was Hakim, the cricket player, the Australian government would have been involved from the get-go. But because Craig Foster put pressure on them to do something, they finally did. So, you know, my respect for Craig Foster is just so profound. I thought he did an amazing job, and it's great to also see, in a football community perspective, someone given a compassionate and humane voice in these sorts of issues when we're so used to hearing anti-immigrant rhetoric from some elements of the media and some elements of Canberra. So, my admiration for Craig is just immense.
Yes, of course.
We would like to say a big thank you to Craig Foster for taking time out to speak with Max. A big congratulations to Max and Santina and everybody that worked on that interview. They did an amazing job. If you want to see the full conversation, just go to the All About A-League TV Show Facebook page. Also, over the next few weeks, we'll be bringing you more of Max All-Rounder's interview with Craig Foster. We need to take a quick break. When we'll come back, we'll give you more of our tips for round 25. Welcome back to All About A-League. We're moving on to our tips for the upcoming games for round 25. Just a reminder, all games are in Eastern Standard Time, so check your local listings for times in your area. First up for round 25, we have the Friday night game at Suncorp Stadium between Brisbane Roar and Wellington Phoenix. Can the Phoenix bounce back in this one, Bernd?
I think so, although it was unexpected that they lose in Adelaide. Although I was going for Adelaide, but the way they played, especially in the first half, was very disappointing. So I think Mark Rudan will bring them back on track, and given Brisbane's performance, so I think it will be a win for Wellington.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't expect them to go down that easily in Adelaide, and it's become an interesting battle now between Adelaide, City and Phoenix. But yeah, I expect them to walk away with 3 points in Brisbane.
Yeah, totally agree with you both. Going for Wellington. Saturday, 5:35 at Amy Park, Melbourne City faces Adelaide United. Who is going to secure finals action in this one, Alex?
Well, this one's a tough one because, as I just mentioned, it's become an interesting fight for the fourth place and who's going to get a better position in the playoffs. But considering the season that both teams have had, I think I'm going to go more with Adelaide. And we need to commend Mark Rudan at this point. Marco Kutz at this point, because considering the fact that he doesn't have a contract for next season, he hasn't let that affect himself or the team, and they're performing admirably.
I'm going with a draw on that one. So Melbourne City in these matches, they are always good for a surprise. So
Yeah.
Draw.
I'm going to agree with you on that one. I think maybe a 1-0 draw on that one. Saturday, 7:50 at ANZ Stadium. It's the derby between bitter rivals Western Sydney and Sydney FC. Will the Wanderers have some bragging rights here, Bernd?
I think their only chance is that Sydney FC play Champions League this week. So that might be the only one where they can get something out of that. With all respect, normally Sydney FC should be the favourites. Could be a little bit closer, but still the Blue Ones will win that.
Well, considering that the Wanderers are now out of the playoffs and Sydney FC will want to keep up with Perth and chase any chance they have for that top position, that makes them favourites.
Yeah, I agree. I think Sydney will win. Sunday, 5 p.m. at Amy Park, Melbourne Victory hosts the Central Coast Mariners. Not a case of if, but by how much for them, Alex?
Yes, of course. And this is the type of game that they need coming off a difficult schedule against Perth, Sydney and a Champions League game. Yes, and the earlier they score, the better off they'll be to finish off this game as quickly as possible.
Yeah, with all what happened, the loss in Sydney and playing Champions League this week, but Victory will win that comfortably.
Yeah, too easy. And to finish the round, Sunday, 7 p.m. at HBF Park, Perth Glory encounters the Newcastle Jets. The Glory should be too strong here, Bernd.
Yeah, especially they have the Premiership now right in front of their eyes, so I think they will be 200% motivated and they're going to win that one, and they deserve the Premiership.
Yeah, they just leave little room for doubt this season. They're always favourites, so it's hard to, think of them as not favourites for any game.
Yeah, Perth should win. That's all for this week's edition of All About A-League. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to Bernd and Alex. Thank you, boys.
Thank you very much.
And to Max All-Rounder and Craig Foster for the interview. Don't forget the show is available all around Australia on the Community Radio Network, and you can watch us on Aurora TV on Foxtel and online on the NENBC website. I'm Gabriel D'Angelo. Thank you for watching. Hope your team wins. Bye for now.